Welcome to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where we discuss relevant information concerning the cybersecurity workforce, business development, and best practices, made possible by CMMI. Learn more at cmmis.net. And for a list of authorized publications, visit DewayneHart.com. And now, here's your host, Dewayne Hart.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good day. If you're out in your car and you're headed to lunch, well, I welcome to give you a hello as well, too. So we made it back again to another episode of the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast session. Today is going to be great because I'm going to be talking about a familiar topic. And one of the things I always try to strive to do as a person is to grow. And growth itself transitions into the technology industry. If we go back and think about the older legacy type of applications and systems that were developed 20 years ago, and we relate that to the current structure of applications and systems that we have, that was a growth process. Now, the question goes, why was there such a growth process? Did it just arbitrarily happen because someone said that I had money to spend? Or did it happen because cybersecurity itself has to mature? So today's topic is called Developing a Successful Cybersecurity Maturity Program. A lot of the executive managers out there that are probably listening to the podcast are well tuned to that concept, because if you work in corporate America or if you work for the federal government, you are all in some fashion, in some way, has to deal with a maturity program. In the traditional fashion, a maturity program would be described as continuous improvement. And over the past couple of years, the continuous improvement philosophy has transitioned into the cybersecurity workforce and also to technology. So let's just deep dive into some areas that really carries a lot of weight for cybersecurity maturity. One of those is that cybersecurity maturity takes into account of people, process, and technology. So a maturity program is going to evaluate all three of those to make a determination on where cybersecurity should transition, operate, and provide availability. Now, to my listeners out there, I want you to sit back and think for a minute. When you was working on your job, and maybe it was outside of cybersecurity, have you ever been given a task such as a workflow process and was told, okay, we need to find ways to make this better? And then you went down and you wrote a couple of things that you saw that was wrong, and then you came up with some recommendations, and then you submitted that to your different teams or your executive manager, or you presented that in a group meeting. Now, what you did transitions directly over to cybersecurity. So let's just deep dive into this podcast here and try to look at the purpose of maturity. I want to make sure I establish one of the key enablers is that cybersecurity maturity helps organizations to increase protection and lower risk. Because as you increase your protection and you lower risk, that's when you can mature your programs. Because those cybersecurity programs can operate effectively, and you don't have to worry about incidents, and you don't have to worry about hacking. You don't have to worry about any of the type of violations that you may have with a system. I wrote a conceptual model to go follow the cybersecurity mindset, which actually takes into account the the growth and the development of cybersecurity program. It is a conceptual model that actually takes the cybersecurity mindset book through different stages, where it starts to talk about the inclusive culture, situational awareness, risk-based thinking, and transitions that over into an output. And that output states you can mature your programs. But to make that happen, you have to increase protection and lower risks. And then the second stage moves over into transforming the mindset. It's where some of your older traditional ways of managing cybersecurity has to change. And then the last stage just talked about the adaptive mindset and stating that you must remain resilient and you have to increase availability and you have to have a continuous engagement into cybersecurity. Now, there are certain models out there that are created, but what those cybersecurity maturity models do is that they attempt to collect the best cybersecurity practices. So there's no standard for some of these models. They're just built based on what the business or the organization thinks that works best. They are developed by a collaboration with experts from diverse backgrounds, yes. Because if you want to build a strong cybersecurity maturity process, you need all hands on deck. And, the term all hands on deck means that everybody has to be involved. One of the other factors is that it takes a life cycle and continuous improvement approach to cybersecurity. When we think about a life cycle, and if I draw a circle, and if I start at 0 degrees, and if I keep going all the way around to 360 degrees, I would reset it again. So a cybersecurity maturity process starts in stages. So if you think about stage 1 is at 0 degrees, but stage 2 gets at 90 degrees, and then at 180, you reach stage 3, and then from 180 to 270, maybe you reach another stage, and then from 270 to 360, that's when you completely close out. Okay, so when you think about a life cycle, this is what these cybersecurity maturity programs are about, because they're a life cycle. Because you have to have a continuous engagement approach. Because as you go through your life cycle, the systems are going to change. And once those systems change, that's when you have to hit the reset button again. Some of the outputs are that you're going to be looking at your baseline. Your baseline is looking at the minimum type of security controls that need to be in place. It's going to establish a foundation for consistent evaluation. It gives you a starting point. It gives you a standard. And also, too, it's a management tool so you can assess where your organization really stands in its cybersecurity efforts. And speaking of cybersecurity expert, you also are going to be able to understand your security posture. Okay, how is your security posture operating? Are you really a risk-conscious organization? Do you have all your defenses in place? Are your employees following the human firewall theory and carrying that defensive mindset? So the purpose of the maturity in itself is just an evaluation just to see where the organization stands and to give that organization a starting point so that they can build security in a process where it's very effective. There is a cybersecurity connection. And, the outcome is based on the responsible actions and ownership, because through these maturity models, somebody has to take the responsibility for these models. Somebody has to do the oversight. Someone has to hold somebody else accountable. Because if there's a problem when you try to take organization through these maturity models, someone has to take ownership. And so we know what ownership means, that some form of accountability has been taken in place. And we will look at accountability. So that means that you see through the entire process. And as far as responsibility, it's just taking responsible action for for what you're responsible for, and that's cybersecurity. Some of the other connections here with cybersecurity is that the DoD has the cybersecurity maturity model certification. As of now, a lot of government contracting companies have to go through that certification. The old form were called DFARS, but now, the government is making it mandated that a lot of government contracting companies go through that model as well. NIST has a cybersecurity framework in place. SECO use CMMI, and also, too, you have the cybersecurity capability maturity model, which is C2MT. Excuse me, it is C2M2. Now, those are some of the models that are out there. And, the overall premises of those models is to assess, change, and also to check out your configuration management program, because you want to make sure that the baseline is in place, because if the baseline is in place, then your configuration management program operates as well. Your identity and assets management has to be evaluated, your threat and vulnerability management program, and also, too, your situational awareness have to be evaluated, too. Because situational awareness is about understanding the environment. So when you go through these maturity models, you're graded on whether you understand your environment. Do you know how many vulnerabilities are on an enterprise? Are you actively engaged in cybersecurity on a daily basis through a continuous engagement efforts? Those are some of the situational awareness requirements that have to be in place. Now, the cybersecurity models help organizations to do certain things. Provide services for the customers without interruption. If you think about the customer base, you need a standard in place so that you can keep your customers happy. So what these maturity models does, it gives you a starting point and a benchmark so that you can understand how to carry cybersecurity out. And as you become successful in those programs, then your organization can mature. So let's say if an organization is at a stage 1 and it's a certain standard that needs to be followed, and the organization does well on that, then now they can go to stage 2. And this is great simple, because you can only get better as you go through these stages. But as you go through those stages and as you mature and as your system changes, that's when you have to go back through that maturity model again, because of the different type of configurations and baselines that you have to establish for your organization. Protect sensitive customer and proprietary information. Yes, because not only is these maturity models allows you to interface with your customers, but also internally how well the organization is practicing cybersecurity itself. It even goes around to kind of look at the way that the teams may communicate and respond to risk. It can also be how organization remediate vulnerabilities, looking at your configuration management. All of the different practices, including privacy and data protection, are taken into account. One of the other areas, too, is that how does an organization comply with laws and regulations? Because that's very important, because if you're with the federal government, are you following the FISMA standard? If you are in corporate America, if you choose to adopt a standard such as ISO, are you following that standard as well? So if you really look at these maturity models are designed to give you a starting point so that you as an organization can understand where you are and where you need to go. Now we know with cybersecurity, there's always a room where we say, okay, where are those potential gaps at? Because we have a risk-based attitude, and we have that risk-based attitude, so we know there are some potential gaps with every program that is established. Here goes some of them. Some models may not be compatible with other business frameworks and processes. In some cases, different frameworks are compatible. ITIL and COBIT, for instance, can work together. So if you think about the way you put those models together, you have to be very conscious about other processes. Because if you work with the federal government, there are certain standards that the federal government use. Let's say, for instance, you have DHS and you have FSMA. So they're all part of the government system. Now, unless you are in corporate America and you follow FSMA standards, that's the only time it applies to you. If you're in the government system, I don't think they follow COBIT. So that means it would not apply to the government. So that means that the government has to stay very close to FedRAMP, FSMA, and RMF standards. Some models may not meet security standards for some businesses. It does not take into account specific requirements that some organizations may have. Some models cannot account for everything because these models are pretty much designed to provide a standard. So if an organization do not have a true insight to their business, then they may be bringing models on board that are kind of difficult and it can be challenging to go put in place. I've always stated that doing a feasibility study is the first thing that most organizations should do prior to even bringing on board models. Do some research and see whether the models will work for see whether a model will work for your organization, because there are different technologies in place, there are different processes in place, there are different goals and budgets, and a long list of other things that interface to cybersecurity in these maturity models. So you want to make sure that if you decide to bring one of these models on board, that you can do it of ease, because you don't want to spend a lot of your budget trying to bring a model on board and then it fails for you. Because we're not in the business to waste money. We are in the business to increase protection and lower risk, right? So if we can increase protection and lower risk, then that go carry our budget down. Some models are not universally relevant to all organizations. Public versus private organization, as stated before. There are some models that you build for the DoD that corporate America cannot use. There are some standards for corporate America that the government cannot use. And that's why a feasibility study has to be done so that an organization can decide what actually matters most, what actually makes them move, what actually makes their organization effective. I know, for instance, through my personal experience, I've seen a lot of organizations true insight of your configuration baseline. You don't know how your configuration management database operates. You don't know the configuration of certain applications and systems. See, like these are the things that are very important prior to even approaching these models, because you don't want to try to go through this process and try to figure out this information. This is something that you should already know prior to engaging these models. This in itself takes us back to business transformation and digital modernization, because under the business transformation, we're always trying to do things a lot better. We're always trying to find a much smoother way to operate cybersecurity. So part of that process is sometimes you have to do a feasibility study. And through digital modernization, what actually tools and different type of technologies that you need to bring on board. And maybe some of those technologies and tools that you have on board, you need to remove them from your environment because they're not useful for you. And they may harm your maturity process. You may spend too much time trying to find ways to improve a system when you can just get rid of the system and get something brand new. Okay? So let's move on to some of my favorite area. It's called best practices. So just imagine that your organization just finished going through a process of maturing, and you're at a certain stage, and everybody has been taking notes. And under all those notes are a list of things that could have went better, okay, where you have a list of recommendations, because that list of recommendations is supposed to make things a lot more smoother for you next time. And those are called best practices. Here goes some best practices. Familiarize yourself with the details of the model. Very, very important, because that's part of the feasibility study, is that you have to know the model. Make sure it works for you. Identify the certification level appropriate for your company, because there may be level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Where is it that your company can achieve to or at? See, that's very important too, because you really don't want to try to jump into a model and realize that you're only capable of like going to level 2, but you know what? You want to be at level 4. See, that's too much work. Okay, so you stay in your lane. Evaluate your current cybersecurity program and capabilities. Yes, I've already touched on that, because if you don't know your program, you're going to make the entire process a little bit more difficult. So through your feasibility studying, you're going to learn your environment, and you're going to take notes, and you're going to figure out the pain points. You're going to realize that your risk management program operates at a certain level. Maybe your vulnerability management program operates at a certain level. Maybe your governance program operates to a certain standard. These are the things that need to be known. One of the other areas, which is my most favorite discussion, is that you have to have a continual engagement. What a continual engagement means is that you're always at the front of driving your models in cybersecurity. You cannot choose when to be a part of cybersecurity. Think about this. You just came into your office on a Monday morning, and there is a let's say email. And in that particular email there, it states that the organization will be doing a new maturity assessment for this week. And during the last assessment, you were not part of it. Okay? Now you got to be a part of this engagement. Now you got to play catch up, because you don't know how those engagement operates. So that's where your continual engagement comes to surface. Gain as much visibility as possible. In the cybersecurity mindset, I talk about having a 360 degrees of security visibility. The purpose of having that 360 degrees of security visibility is to make sure that you know what exists in all the crevices of your environment. You know how incident response programs work. You know the sensitive parts of your environment. You know what servers are on the environment. You know what servers are failing. You know how your vulnerability scanning tools work. And you know the current risk state of the environment as well. Strive to mature cybersecurity program, improve cyber hygiene, and mitigate. Yes. If you can have that mindset where you're always trying to make sure that these programs are remediated away from a lot of vulnerabilities, then you're taking those strong steps toward improving cybersecurity. Now, with cyber hygiene, this means that you got to clean up things, okay? You got to have that continuous engagement where you're cleaning up the environment. One of the other areas that does a lot of support is your third-party assessment. And these third-party assessments is that you as an organization can hire another company to come on board to help you out, because it's an independent evaluation. Now you have an outside set of eyes that can do the evaluation for you. Now, I've always talked about having that risk-based attitude because a lot of times organizations may feel kind of shameful if their risk discovered, so they don't want anybody else to find out about issues they have on the enterprise. That's where that continuous engagement comes on board. And having another organization to look at your enterprise is very important, because then what happens is that you have an independent evaluation. And maybe this organization can see some things that you have not seen since you were operating the environment. Here goes some references and thoughts. Think about digital modernization. Think about increased protection and lower risk. Here are some critical things that need to be taken into account. You always have to look at this as a life cycle approach. You also want to collect the best cybersecurity practices, and you want to utilize those practices for your maturity model. Use cybersecurity tools effectively. If you have certain tools on your environment, you want to make the best of those tools, like Splunk, Tenable Nexus. If you're using something like Brinka, using RSite, any of these cybersecurity tools, you want to make the best use of those tools. Some of the other organizations like NIST, ISACA, and DHS are areas that you can focus on as well, because those organizations are always posting information that can help with maturity programs. One of the other pieces of information that I like to share is that you are only as good as you inspect. I remember when I was in the military, that was a common slogan used, and it stated that shipmates are only as good as they inspect. So, as a cybersecurity professional, you are only as good as you inspect. So, with a maturity program, you're always going to be inspecting. So, if you don't inspect, then you can also have an outcome where your risk is going up and your protection standard goes down. And we don't want that to happen. So I also like to say that this podcast has a lot of alignment over to the cybersecurity mindset. Chapter 2 on the growth mindset follows as well too, because in that chapter I did a long discussion about having that growth mindset and trying to get better. Chapter 3, embracing organizational change. Change management applies to maturity. Chapter 12, risk discovery and opportunities. And Chapter 13, proactive and reactive measures. When you're proactive, see, that means that you do a feasibility study, because in cybersecurity, we always want to make sure that we operate more so on a proactive side than a reactive side. Modernizing your workforce for Chapter 18, and also Chapter 19, just wearing that hacker's hat. Because that hacker's hat is very important, because as you go through these maturity processes, you always want to think, what is it that a hacker may be thinking about if they were sitting at this desk now? Okay? And as I stated before, you always want to beat the hackers to the finish line. One of the other things I always like to state is that on a job, we all strive to improve. And a lot of time is spent toward technology and trying to improve technology. So as a common worker, you go fall under a workforce. Now, trying to improve the workforce can only happen when you effectively build that workforce. And there are some intricate pieces that go along with the workforce. And one of those is that you have to have a continuous engagement into cybersecurity. And once you can engage into cybersecurity, that's when the workforce can become better equipped to handle some of the cybersecurity initiatives and tasks that goes on. So I would say this. If you are sitting there now with your coffee cup, I guess you're saying to yourself, wow, cybersecurity workforce, how do we build those engagements? Oh, wow. Well, you know what? In the next episode, which is episode 5, building security engagement into the cyber workforce, I am going to talk about that topic. And just keep in mind, you are only safe as your mindset.
You've been listening to the Chief of Cybersecurity podcast, where you have gained relevant knowledge to enhance your cybersecurity mindset. Be sure to visit DewayneHart.com to learn more about authored publications, show notes, and discover more information concerning cybersecurity.